Hey everybody, welcome to day 165 in our Bible in a Year Plus podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a great day in Israelite history. Anya Gold was sent to the United States from Poland in 1930. She was the oldest child in her family, and the family had decided that they would, little by little, as money made it possible, send the children and then the parents along to a better life in America. She lived with a loving aunt in Baltimore, and there were always letters going back and forth. But then the Nazis seized Poland, and the letters stopped coming, and the rest of Anya's family never came to the U.S. Eventually, Anya married Saul. They have a wonderful marriage, and it was a romance from paradise, except for one thing: they could not have children together. As much as they wanted children, it just wasn't working out. And so they found out that there was an adoption agency in New York that had a baby available, and so they went to the adoption agency, and they were all excited. And when they got there, the director of the agency said, "I'm sorry, but the grandmother has decided to raise this baby as her own, and so we don't have a baby available for you." She says, "But we do have a little girl named Miriam, and she's a beautiful child, and she could sure use a family." And they said, "How old is Miriam?" And the director said, "She's 8 years old." And Anya and Saul said, "I'm sorry, we had our hearts set on a baby." And so everybody understood, and they went back home disappointed. And for a whole year, they thought about it. And for a whole year, it just bothered Anya that this little girl, Miriam, who was so precious, needed a family, and no other baby came available. And one day, Anya said to Saul, "Maybe we should have another look at Miriam and the possibility of adopting her." And he was glad to do that. So they called the adoption agency, and they said, "Is Miriam still available?" And they said, "Well, not very many people want to adopt a 9-year-old girl. So yes, she is still available, but there's a complication. The complication is that we now also have her little brother in our care, and he's 6 years old, and they love each other. They're inseparable, and we promised them that we would never separate them. They could stay together." Well, it only took Anya and Saul a few minutes to decide, okay, well, we'll adopt both the children. So they bring the children to their home in Baltimore. They go through the door, and little Moshe, the little guy, he's kind of shy. He doesn't do much. But Anya is very extroverted, and so she goes all through the room, and she's looking at everything that's in the room, the furnishings, the little knickknacks here and there. And then she gets to the piano, and she stops, and she says, "Why do you have a picture of my grandmother on your piano?" And Anya says, "What?" And little Miriam says, "My grandmother. Why is my grandmother's picture on your piano?" And Anya explained to Miriam, "There must be some mistake. We have that picture on the piano because that is my mother. That's not your grandmother." And Miriam says, "No." And Miriam ran to her suitcase, and she dug out a picture and brought it to Anya. And it was the same picture. It was the identical picture. She said, "My grandmother." And Anya is just shocked. And she says, "That's my mother." And then the little girl, Miriam, says, "You want to see what my mommy looks like?" Runs to the suitcase again, gets another picture, and when Anya sees it, Anna's knees buckle, and she drops to the floor on her knees. She says, "Sarah." And little Miriam says, "That's my mommy." And so unknowingly, Anya had adopted the orphaned children of her dead sister, Sarah. They were like really, really hers, her own flesh and blood, you might say. And this amazing good day. I mean, who would think this is such a grand day, a godly day, a supernatural day. This was a very good day. And today we're going to talk about a very good day in the life of Esther, reading Esther chapters 8 through 10. Beginning in chapter 8, verse 1 in the King James Version of the Bible with updated vocabulary, but you can follow along in another version if you prefer. Chapter 8, verse 1. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther, the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and begged him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters planned by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people, or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kin?" Then the king Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, "See, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write also for the Jews as it pleases you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, no man can reverse." Then the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month Sivan, on the 23rd day of the month. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants and deputies and rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing of it, unto every people after their language, to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote it in King Ahasuerus' name, sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, in which the king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a plunder. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready before that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Chapter 9. Now, in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them, the Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants, and deputies, and officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces, for this man Mordecai grew greater and greater. Thus the Jews struck down all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they wished unto those who hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandatha, and Delphon, and Aspatha, and Poratha, and Adaliah, and Aridatha, and Parmashta, and Arisai, and Aridai, and Vajezatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, they killed, but on the plunder they did not lay their hand. On that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said to Esther the queen, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition, and it shall be granted you? Or what is your request further, and it shall be done?" Then Esther said, "If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according as this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows." And the king commanded it so to be done, and the decree was given at Shushan, and they hung Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and killed 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they did not lay their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives and had rest from their enemies and killed of their enemies 75,000, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were assembled at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day of it, and on the 14th day, and the 15th day of it they rested, and made a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the villages that resided in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same month yearly, as the days in which Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device which he devised against the Jews should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves to them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, according to their appointed time every year. And that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had obligated them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Chapter 10. And the king Ahasuerus laid a tax upon the land and upon the islands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, unto which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next to the king Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brothers, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. And that is the end of chapter 10, the end of the book of Esther. All right, so in chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, we see that Esther is rewarded with Haman's land, and Mordecai is rewarded with Haman's position in the government. In chapter 8, verses 9 through 14, we see that though the king could not overturn his previous decree, it was, certain as the laws of the Medes and the Persians. It cannot be changed. He could not overturn it, but he could counter it with a new decree. And the new decree was that on the appointed day of the Holocaust, of the slaughter, the Jews should band together, prepare themselves, and all get together. So there are no stragglers. They're band together, and also the Persian government lieutenants and officers would help the Jewish people to fend off the attackers. And that's, of course, exactly what happened. They had 8 months still to get ready for that 13th day of the 12th month, and so they had 8 months to prepare themselves, and of course no great harm came to them. Oppositely, their attackers were executed. Then in chapter 8 verse 17, we see that there's this preliminary celebration, which is not Purim yet, the Feast of Purim. This is just, relief that there is a new order given by the king that the Jews don't have to be slaughtered. They can defend themselves, and the king is backing them. And so that is a celebration. In chapter 8, verse 17, we see this very interesting thing. It says, "And many of the people became Jews that day." That is so interesting. This is the only place in the Old Testament that says that Gentile people converted to the religion of the Jews. They converted to Judaism, and they became Jews that day by conversion. And that's the only place in the Old Testament where it says the Gentiles became Jews by conversion that day. Of course, many Gentiles had already become Jews by conversion, but this is the only place in the Old Testament where it says that they became Jews. And that would be the best thing of all. In Old Testament days, not appropriate for now because the Jews have rejected their Messiah. But in Old Testament days, the best thing you could do as a Gentile would be to convert to Judaism. They became Jews, God's chosen people by conversion. And what could be better than that? In chapter 9, verses 1 through 19, we see that in the Jewish self-defense, they killed 500 and then another 300, 800 altogether in Shushan. And then we see that they killed 75,000 attackers elsewhere in the entire empire. And so the Jewish people lost few or none, but the attackers lost 75,000 plus another 800 in the capital city. Then we see in chapter 9, verse 20, the official description of Purim on the 14th day of the 12th month. So once again, you know how this goes, and it's actually for 2 days. But on the 14th day of the last month of the year, every year, the Jewish people would celebrate Purim, this deliverance that the Lord worked out for them. And then 1 month later, on the 14th day of the first month, they would celebrate Passover. So we have Purim and Passover separated by 1 month. And then we come to chapter 10, very short chapter, and it talks about Mordecai and his example of seeking the welfare of his people and speaking peace. And I love that. That's just a great description of what your life and my life as followers of Jesus, this is what we want to do. We want to seek the well-being of God's people. We just want to build up God's church. We want to add more people to the Lord's church. We just want to seek the welfare of God's people and speak peace. That's what we want to do. And so Mordecai becomes a great example to all of us as to how we should live our lives. And once again, we're not sure that Mordecai and Esther really did put away all of their pagan associations and really live for God ever after. We hope they did, but we don't know that they did. And so we just hope. One thing more to notice, and this is what we are going to take for our great life lesson. In chapter 9, verse 22, it says that they went from mourning to a very good day. I love that. They went from mourning to a very good day. And I love that because it reminds us that for the Lord's people, there's never a very long period of mourning. There is mourning. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. There is weeping, there is mourning, there is hardship, but it never lasts for very long. And that mourning is always turned into a very good day, a very happy ending. There's always a happy ending for the people of God. So I hope you are a follower of the Lord. I hope that you are a Christian, that you are a believer. And if you are, and if you're going through a hard time right now, can I just assure you that your weeping won't last very long. Your mourning, your weeping is very soon going to be turned into a very good day. And you watch, and that's the way it's going to be. All right, so that should be our prayer. We want to thank the Lord in advance, though we are having perhaps a hard time today. Maybe we're going through hardship. Maybe life is hard. But there's going to be very soon a very happy ending to your story. So let's thank the Lord by faith in advance for the very good day that's just around the corner. Father God, we do indeed understand that life is hard. It's like we live in Jurassic Park. Life is always hard, one thing after another, bad things. But Lord, our mourning never lasts very long if we follow you. And we are committed to following you. And because of that, We're looking for a happy ending very soon, a very good day. And we look for it by faith in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, okay. God bless you. Thank you for spending day 165 with me in our Bible in a Year Plus podcast. And I sure hope I get to see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.